Speak! Caesar is turned to hear.
Beware the Ides of March!
What man is that?
The soothsayer bids you beware the Ides of March.
Set him before me. Let me see his face.
Hello, come from the throng. Look upon Caesar.
What sayest thou to me now? Speak once again.
Beware the Ides of March.
He is a dreamer. Let us leave him.
We must speak the truth about terror. Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories, malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves.
Take your own advice. What happens? I tell you what happens. Blam!
I have a window that looks directly at the World Trade Center, and I saw...
No delusion!
Shit's getting way too complicated for me.
Harry, find your head, be president.
Welcome to the AnteDote. This is Greg McCarran.
This is Jeremy Rothkushel.
All right. Beware the Ides of March. We thought that was a fitting intro clip for, indeed, we are in what would be called the Ides of March right now. And, heaven forbid we don't have any major, earth or major events such as the we're approaching 20 years of Iraq, which happened during what could be called the Ides of March on March 19th, or the NATO invasion into Libya. So, but these are things that have happened, of course, in recent years in the month of March. We might call it the Ides of March. And so hopefully we don't have anything like that. Although it is interesting, we are this year, we are about to approach this Sunday, the 20th anniversary of the, obviously the fateful follow-up to the most fateful event of our generation in terms of America, the events of September 11th, and then, of course, being used as a justification for the absolute catastrophic disaster, both in terms of human lives and in terms of negative consequences of the invasion of Iraq. And we're approaching 20 years on that. And I'm sure that'll come up in the discussion during this show, and we may do more about that going forward here in the next couple of weeks here as we do approach this very solemn and fateful anniversary. But we're going to call this a bit of an Ides of March, just a free-flowing conversation about some of the things currently going on right now, Jeremy. So for the people who like to stay for the tangents, this is going to be one big tangential episode of the AnteDote here. So Jeremy, I know we've got some things that are on both of our minds right now. I'm thinking a lot about this Fox revelations of Dominion, and now Tucker Carlson saying that you can't question Building 7 on TV or else your career will be ruined. And so I've got a lot of thoughts about that, and I think we're on the same wavelength on this. But I don't know, Jeremy, you just have any initial thoughts you'd like to start out with any of this recent news or any of the other stuff going on that's particularly on your mind during this Ides of March period we find ourselves in?
Well, there's so much coming to an informational and rhetorically weaponized head right now, including the re-escalation of the quote-unquote lab leak scenario. Very suspicious in terms of the timing of all of it. It appears that this Department of Energy Z division, I think related to X division that we've referenced before, which was the target apparently of this infamous biggest software quote unquote hack in history in the spring of 2000, that in Seeds of Fire, Gordon Thomas says was an operation targeted by a combination of Chinese and Israeli intelligence against the U.S. national nuclear security infrastructure in New Mexico, and that the target of it was the X division, this very one of the most secret pieces of nuclear uh, um, information and intelligence, it looks like, in the United States, specifically related to the Department of Energy's uh, nuclear bomb squad, the NEST, which, by the way, I'll remind folks, they were out of the country for the first time in 3 years on September 11th. They were in Europe doing a terrorist nuclear bomb threat drill. And meanwhile, just a year and a little bit earlier, apparently the Chinese and Israelis teamed up to penetrate the X Division's secret hard drives. It looks to me like under cover of some big forest fire in the region, and were able to exfiltrate all of this information from the nuclear bomb squad under the U.S. X Division in the Department of Energy that included things such as how to undo certain nuclear devices, tactical nuclear devices that could be deployed by terrorists or state actors. So now we had this Z division, which is related to the biological warfare aspects that are contained, intelligence and contained under the Department of Energy. A report that they had done, I believe it was years earlier, but then it once again re-highlighted specifically out of the Rupert Murdoch syndicate, the Wall Street Journal, I believe by one of the key other Iraq War disinformationists, quote unquote journalists, Michael Gordon, who, along with Judith Miller, I think they were the two leading propagandists for the run up to the Iraq War. That gets released just maybe a week before the U.S. Congress starts holding hearings about the quote unquote China lab leak, Wuhan Institute of Virology lab leak, or alleged origins of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So there is tons of weaponized propaganda in the middle of just that moment, right? So we probably will not delve deeply into that today, but that is on the scene right now. And then when you then factor in this timing of the Ides of March and the run up to this time of when these warmongers tend to like to launch their wars, not only Ides of March, but this year the Purim going on, and then the really sadistic nature of the launching of the Iraq War on the eve of basically the spring of 2003. Um, so there's that. There's also then this whole question of Silicon Valley Bank and the destabilization of the U.S. banking system, but the specifics of Signature Bank and Silicon Valley Bank, and there's a lot of geopolitics and deep politics behind the players in all of this. And so there is tons going on right now, and then you factor all of that into the general information warfare environment that you first brought up in terms of where Fox News is going, where Tucker Carlson is going in relationship to domestic politics, and you have a fully loaded moment, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And yeah, I think we're going to have to probably get deeper into this bank stuff going on recently because it's been going on because there's a significance to the bank failures in this moment and the rehyphening up of distrust in terms of like economic and financial institutions in addition to governmental institutions that needs to be had. And, I don't think either of us right now at the moment probably have the forensics to like really have a long discussion about it, but it's certainly something that we need to keep an eye on. And of course, we can identify the very deceptive media narratives going on that this is just being laid part and parcel as another part of this ongoing weaponized, manufactured culture war. Like it's all the woke. It's a combination of bad economic policy and wokeness that is. So basically, it's incompetence by the woke the woke inflation, the woke inflationists, basically. And it's a terrible narrative, inversion of reality with Hannity hosting Larry Kudlow and Stephen Moore to talk about how Biden is coddling billionaires. And not to say that doesn't happen, but of course we know their history of propagating for tax cuts and for bailouts to the most obviously highest tiered people economically in terms of the very wealthiest and most corrupt wealthiest among us in our society. So I mean, obviously there's an inversion of reality there, but inversion of reality seems to be the norm. And I mean, we've known this for a long time, and other people have known this for a long time, going back to the height of the Bush years, of course, and on. But inversion of reality seems to be the norm at Fox quote unquote news. And I mean, it's becoming more and more clear as we go on here. And I mean, I've been thinking so much about this recently in the revelations of News Corp. Basically, the Fox viewers just totally, or the hosts are just openly showing basically disdain for their audiences. And I mean, Tucker, it's so interesting, the particular persona of Tucker Carlson, who I think has established himself as he's the most influential and I would say consequential person in all of like American media right now because of the specific role he plays. And he's been that way for a few years now, but that's only becoming more and more the case. And the combination of Tucker Carlson in an email saying, or a text message exchange saying, quote unquote, I hate Donald Trump passionately, and then also presenting himself going on this Redacted podcast, which I didn't realize was like this big time, super popular, I guess, podcast that gets hundreds of thousands of views and I'm sure many subscribers, at least on YouTube. I'm not sure about other outlets, but I was first exposed to Redacted podcast via the Rage Against the War Machine rally. And then I see Tucker Carlson pop up on this podcast where he has a clip that is pretty viral of him talking about how if anybody in his position, like as a television journalist or host, were to say and he question like September 11th and the question of how Building 7 fell, your career would be over. And so, and of course, those of you who out there who have been following, 9/11 truth, whatever term you want to use for that movement, and the role of Tucker Carlson, some of us who still know and have known for a long time that Fox News is like I would say maybe the biggest. I mean, there's others now with the escalated media environment with the Death Star of 2016 and all this, but long term, since the height of the Bush era, the biggest, I would say, internal enemy we've had in terms of like media propaganda is, I would say, Fox News Network, in terms of people who haven't forgotten that, who realize just how destructive it was and still hold to that, and that their opinion hasn't changed on that because Tucker Carlson goes on TV and says nice things about Vladimir Putin and talks about how woke culture is out of control and how the brown hordes are coming in to replace and kill the white man and all this. Those of us who haven't forgotten, we've known for a long time just the destructive elements of Fox and the role specifically you were talking before we went on air of like the way people like Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly were so nasty towards like the 9/11 the truthers, as they would be called. But then the other person who we were talking about in the form of this conversation, who was, Glenn Beck as well. And of course, Glenn Beck had a show on Fox and popularized the Finkelstein-Birnbaum narrative around George Soros during his Fox News show during the height of the Tea Party. But the other person we're thinking about, like, that was really particularly nasty, and there's others too as well. But in terms of the media moment we're in now, it's very interesting that Tucker Carlson is presenting himself as this person who is asking the questions that no one else in his media position will ask, like, what did happen to Building 7? Why can't I say this on TV? Why would my career be destroyed if I were to talk about this? When Tucker, you go back, and Tucker wasn't even on Fox at the time. He was on MSNBC. And he was, during the height of the Bush era, when something really could have been done, like to raise awareness and attention at the time of like the 9/11 Commission report and all this, and some of the scientific research into the nature of what happened at the World Trade Center was starting to really come into fruition. And Tucker Carlson did multiple interviews where he was ridiculing. I believe he did 2 interviews, one with David Ray Griffin and one with Stephen Jones, just ridiculing them for their ridiculous conspiracy theories about September 11th. And there was another video where he basically, I think it was Adam Kokesh's crew, right, Jeremy?
Yes, I think so.
Where he basically said, he joked about how 9/11 truthers should be like removed, and then he does this stupid stupid laugh he does.
And I think
on the
that's
show.
when he said they're parasites.
Yeah, they're parasites. Yes, this is. Well, of course, no one's saying that they should be removed, but they are, just like paraphrasing, like they're parasites, and that goes on top of some other really nasty language, like talking about Iraqi savages, and basically, I think paying lip service to the idea that we should just go in and bomb Iran, and all of this in his the days before he became a reformed ex-neocon with his mea culpa, to quote the title of Michael Cohen's show. And by the way, there's elements of Michael Cohen I'd probably take a little more seriously than Tucker Carlson at this point. Not to say that Cohen, I don't trust him, but he was actually burned by like the people who he thought he was trusted and thought he was allies with. Whereas Tucker, it just seems like there's just this very weaponized conversion, whereas he's still promoting the nastiest of like the combination of the terror war narratives and the culture war narratives. And so I'm just thinking about the combination of like Tucker basically showing disdain for his audience in these text message exchanges. Oh, I hate Trump passionately. I can't wait for when we don't have to talk about him anymore. And then he goes on air and gets the exclusive, quote unquote, release of the January 6th tapes from Kevin McCarthy, and he whitewashes it to just show that, like, oh, the Trump supporters, they were peacefully visiting the Capitol, which is a right of every American to do. And there were a few people who caused problems, but look at how the QAnon shaman was brought in by police, and look at this, and this, and the media doesn't tell you about how non-violent it actually really was. And the way he spun it, the way he's been spinning it for 2 years by promoting the Antifa narrative, and even having people like Ali Alexander and his Fox Nation exclusive investigative journalism look into January 6th. I think that came out about a year or so ago, but he does that, and he continues to run defense for Trump, even though Fox is noticeably soured on Trump, which we might talk about more going forward. But, there's still that defense of him. There's a defense of the bigger January 6th, bigger 11/9, obviously. And this disdain for viewers now comes in with Tucker now saying, like, we're the Fox News guy who people in the, who should know better, unfortunately, put a lot more faith and value into than they should, saying now that Building 7 is this taboo third rail and your career will be destroyed if you question it. It's just, it's a really messed up situation. And I mean, the whole thing with Fox in general is extremely messed up. But I was just thinking about this particular element, and I think it's given, even within the last few days, just like it even further increased, I think, from our perspective of like the weaponized narrative warfare, long-term and short-term, coming from an outlet like Fox, and the continuity from the Bush days to what we're seeing play out now. And of course, the narratives have become a bit more, obviously, they've become more heavy in terms of like the continued perpetuation and escalation of things in our society as time has gone on, and the escalation of these manufactured divisions and all of this. But it is still, I think, the bigger game and narrative warfare being played that has been a staple of Fox ever since it was set up by the foreigner, as he was referred to in a tweet I saw, and Rupert Murdoch and his, I would say, hostile to America, hostile to the ideas of America, hostile to the American nation and the American people media outlet of Fox News. And so this is nothing new, but I think we're getting more insight into elements of how like these narrative propaganda warfare types of operations work in the form of someone like Tucker Carlson through these 2 different recent revelations about him. One, his disdain for Donald Trump, and basically his disdain for his viewers who buy into his narratives of framing Trump as the innocent victim of the constant, nonstop deep state conspiracies, and now framing himself as the guy who's going to take up whatever remnants of 9/11 truth mantle is left by asking this viral question about Building 7 and why we can't question these things, when he was one of the very nastiest in the media when the height of the Bush era and all of the things that happened as a result of September 11th were really at their initial height.
It's very true, and there is so much here to unpack just in terms of the dynamics surrounding Tucker Carlson and Fox News. And I think that we're seeing the emergence of these weaponized dialectics, where you have Fox News, Tucker Carlson as one bookend or pole of the current weaponized political moment that really came into force with the 11/9 operation and the installment of Trump in the White House. And then you have the breakout, the alternative media that in large part seems to surround a platform like Rumble, which, by the way, the early investment before the maybe the Wall Street takeover by the 9/11 implicated uh, Marsh McLennan oriented, uh, or not Marsh McLennan, but right, Greg? What was what's his name? The guy who led the Rumble investment for to go
I get,
public.
I always get Lorber and Lutnick mixed up. It's
Lorber.
Howard Lorber, yes.
And he's a associate. So you look up Rumble and you Cantor Fitzgerald. That's of Cantor Fitzgerald. You go look at the top 10 owners of Rumble Inc. Uh, in a recent Money.cnn business article, and you have Cantor Fitzgerald led by oh, maybe it's Lutnick. I think it's Lutnick, right, Greg? I think it's Lutnick. Howard Lutnick. We can't keep our Howards straight here. Howard Lorber versus Howard Lutnick. This is Lutnick, I believe. And it's Cantor Fitzgerald is the leading stakeholder. They were the ones who now really are the lead investors in and basically have substantial ownership in Rumble. And so you have a 9/11 affiliated firm here with the CEO having missed ground zero on September 11th, doing friendly interviews with the Rumble founder and CEO. And then right underneath that, you see the Vanguard Group, Bank of America Securities, BlackRock Fund Advisors, and on down. And so this has become now the new pole of even like the what was sort of came of the 9/11 truth movement folks like Kevin Barrett. Now that's like his main platform for video. And but then you have these big Rumble stars, such as people like Russell. What's his name? I can't remember his name either.
Russell Brand.
Russell Brand, who just did a big viral moment about both sides of equal propaganda in terms of mainstream corporate media in the U.S., conflating MSNBC with Fox in a very factually dishonest kind of fashion, I would say, while mainly like it being about the denial of the quote unquote Trump Russia collusion and attacking that as just a corporate media conspiracy theory, similar to maybe Tucker Carlson would call flat Earth or something like that, right? Those have been equated, and so he Russell Brand is a key new media star on Rumble, but also people like Kim Iverson, who we pointed out is now also she comes up through the Hill morning show, and then and then had started in a very Jimmy Dore kind of affiliated alt left kind of network, and then more recently on her show did a very, very friendly propagandistic interview with one of the founders of the dictators lobby, Paul Manafort, and a key player, obviously, in the 11/9 operation, with deep connections to key Russian oligarchs, basically being owned or and owing key Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska for dozens of millions of dollars of unpaid debts that then somehow get resolved. It looks like in relationship to Manafort's work inside of the Trump campaign. And so you have folks like that. You have Glenn Greenwald is a key figure on Rumble, and yet to this day you still don't have these former 9/11 truth acolytes like Kevin Barrett just pointing out the basics of, oh yeah, your favorite platform now that's facilitating your quote unquote free speech is a 9/11 firm, basically a key 9/11 firm. Hundreds of Cantor Fitzgerald employees were killed on 9/11, but their CEO was not one of them. He didn't show up. Sort of like Lucky Larry Silverstein, who had his dermatologist appointment, which helped him miss his every single morning breakfast at the top of the World Trade Center in the cafe or something like that. And Kevin Barrett, to this day, as far as I know, has never even addressed that he's being platformed by a Cantor Fitzgerald guy. And remember, even like the going back to what you pointed out about the attack on even like the Jersey girls in relationship to 9/11, we've talked about that multiple times. Big Glenn Beck and Coulter, a lot of these Fox affiliated people were attacking the Jersey girls. And I believe at least one of the Jersey girls had a husband who was killed on September 11th and had worked for Cantor Fitzgerald. All right. So there's a lot coming together in terms of that whole scene. And then another interesting weaponized dialectic that's emerging is Trump versus DeSantis, right? And by the way, it seems like DeSantis just recently had his, I would call it his proto Trump Mayflower Center for the National Interest moment, when he came out directly and said that what he called a territorial conflict between Russia and Ukraine there was no U.S. interest in the territorial conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So he hasn't quite yet gone to the level of, that the Russians are involved in taking out the woke, globo homo, euchre Nazi, dog whistling Jewish kind of conspiracy
Right.
yet, but it's heading in that direction.
Yeah. And also when you say that, like people think of that as like, oh, that's like the alt-right white nationalist talking points. But no, it's made itself more and more headway within like what would be called the more like MAGA alt-light type of GOP figures. Like I think I pointed out on one of our shows recently how Charlie Kirk back in December had been quoted as referring to Zelensky as the uppity international welfare queen, and that I believe Tucker and Charlie Kirk compared conversion therapy to the people who took us, the people who want to chop off your genitals, to the people who launched the war in Iraq. So it's like just all this equation of, and that's becoming more and more prevalent within the like what you might call the more establishment friendly elements of MAGA, in addition to just not just like the alt right types of sources. So it's becoming more and more intertwined, and you can see it play out more and more, where even the people who are like the Putin hawks will refer to Ted Cruz referring to a Ukrainian flag as woke virtue signaling, and the way we talked about for the past year now, the way that even the hawks will blame, oh, it's because the woke left is destroying our energy policy, or it's because Biden is unbelievably weak, or it's because even if you don't like Russia, well, we can't be just giving these just free lunch to Ukraine and all this. So I just throw that in there, that like the narratives about like what we call the globo homo. I believe that's a false flag weekly news Michael Jones type of term, is now making more and more headway within the and is now exemplified in Congress by like the Marjorie Taylor Greene types, who people like someone like Kevin McCarthy is increasingly going along with. So I just wanted to throw that in there. It's not just something you hear like on the quote unquote fringes of like the alt right anymore.
No, and it's fairly interesting actually because Rumble has long promoted itself as being quote unquote immune to cancel culture while also directly forbidding pornography, harassment, racism, anti-Semitism, copyright infringement, and illegal content. And meanwhile, if you actually go look at like what like Michael Jones is doing on there with Kevin Barrett many weeks in terms of False Flag Weekly News, it's pretty interesting that they are still up there. And then remember going back to this question of this really crucial big Peter Thiel JD Vance investment in 2021 that really brought Rumble into prominence, and it was at that point valued around a $500 million. And then Trump comes in and joins Rumble in preparation for his Ohio campaign rally. And then remember, there's also this Rumble is the cloud hoster, I believe, is involved with the cloud hosting of Trump's Truth Social, right? And so there is a lot there. Now you then also have like Jimmy Dore. That's where Jimmy Dore is able to post his maybe YouTube edgy kind of content. They originally had uh, uh, put Tulsi Gabbard front and center at Rumble, and then Peter Thiel is crucial in all of this because he then looks to be a key character in the question of this local Silicon Valley bank run, which is really on the surface, that's what happened there. Now there are likely much deeper politics behind the actual operations behind the takedown of Silicon Valley Bank. But this question of then gold, you go look at it, and I've seen that on almost all of these affiliated shows, and that includes all the way back into like the Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire. These gold companies are the big advertisers where I'm beginning to get Alex Jones InfoWars from about 10 years ago kind of vibes, maybe a little bit more, where gold was the epicenter of their sponsorship.
It's like gold survival foods in my pillows.
Yes, and then what you see is Peter Thiel makes a big push into gold in terms of his investments, just a little bit back, and then this then begins to fit into this question of Thiel and Vance have been identified as having run their own media platform that was uh, that was boosting and platforming direct Russian propaganda. And so this then fits into the whole way that we've pointed out that the whole Russian sphere operation of propaganda both plays into, helps facilitate, helps draw out the format of the narrative warfare in terms of this question of the escalation of the culture war, right? And then Putin has this currency weapon advisor named Sergei Glasiev, who has a very interesting background. He was actually came into elected power promising social justice and fighting corruption against Russian oligarchs, and then is right in the middle of the what became known as the Surkov intercepts or Surkov tapes. Remember Vladislav Surkov, the Gray Cardinal, likely the Putin's Gray Cardinal, but likely the brain trust and the originator of the totality of the modern Russian uh, domestic political system in terms of hypernormalization and that whole background and the running of political warfare as theater and running all sides at the same time. And so Glassiev was caught at the key moments, right, of the escalation of the Russian hybrid war on Ukraine politically. That then comes into some fruition in relationship to the Maidan revolution and the Maidan massacre, and then the taking of Crimea, and then the escalation of the dirty war in eastern Ukraine that was being run, as we pointed out, via people like Russian Orthodox Church billionaire Malofeev and people like Alexander Dugin. And so, for example, um, Glassiev has basically had his it's really like maybe a multipolar currency warfare kind of stratagem, being reprinted by the LaRouche people in English many years ago. And then in 2017, Glassiev is quoted as saying, quote, "Today, Ukraine is an occupied territory. There is no legitimate power. There is no one to talk to. There are no people who can take responsibility for the implementation of political agreements. There are only servicemen of American aggressors who receive instructions from the American embassy. From there, they receive funding and, in fact, serve American interests in Ukraine," unquote. Now, I'm sure that many of the alt media folks will say he's just spitting truth there, you know. But as we pointed out, that there is a question of neither nor in relationship to paleo neocon unipolarism versus Putin, Dugin, Bibi style, Xi style, multipolar which is seems to be based maybe even on even more aggressive kinds of destructive politics worldwide. And so a lot of this is coming to the head at the same time, and there is a big push around gold, and then the destabilization of the American monetary system in general, I would say. So then one little other piece to I just want to just finish in terms of Silicon Valley Bank is then obviously then you're dealing with the question of the Talpiot program, long-term back channeling, takeover aspects in relationship to Silicon Valley. And then hearkening back to what I brought up before about this very little known alleged covert operation between Chinese and Israeli intelligence in this key moment of the spring of 2000, that those seem to be some of the key players in terms of internationally in relationship to mass influence and infiltration and penetration and then backdooring technology back out in relationship to Silicon Valley. Now you'd have to throw in then Russia to some extent too, obviously, but those two key geopolitical players, Israel and China, are up to their necks in terms of Silicon Valley and the major players there. And you see this operating in relationship to Silicon Valley Bank, too. There's a strong Chinese tie in that really connects the Chinese tech sector with the American tech sector. And then just an interesting piece is that as the Israeli protests began to gain steam against Bibi, who seems to be actually almost like a Trump on steroids domestically in Israel. He seems to be basically just totally altering the Israeli justice system to some large extent. Sure, there's a longer term authoritarian move and a unitary executive kind of move there in a more macro way. But in terms of the short term, it looks like one of the key things that he's after is to make himself immune from being held from the corruption charges that he is still facing to this day and as prime minister. right? And so we're now in this realm of some kind of Bill Barr, Rod Rosenstein kind of situation where there is a question of whether an American executive can even be charged for anything. Even if I went and shot somebody on Fifth Avenue, I probably couldn't get charged, and so that's going on. And so in the midst of the escalation of some internal Israeli civil society, if you want to call it that, in terms of the much even longer term and bigger problems in terms of their ethno supremacist state, their occupation, the ethnic cleansing operation, the functionally apartheid nature of their government in relationship to Palestinians, both inside and outside their still unrecognized borders. You have some major Israeli tech companies uh, leaving Israel. For example, one of them is Papaya Global, I think is the name of it, and they left Israel and they went to Silicon Valley Bank. Now, what's also interesting is that you have Signature Bank, this other bank that has been uh, shut down in the midst of all of this, that you pointed out, Greg, that there is a major Trump and I think a Kushner. There's also a Kushner connection to Silicon Valley Bank in terms of the Brookfield investments, which is then tied in obviously to the question of the compromise at the highest levels of FBI counterintelligence and the whole McGonigal story, which again hooks right back in to Manafort's Master Deripaska. But Signature Bank has a very interesting history in that it looks like it was originally formed by one of the major three Israeli banks, a bank that we've talked about before, Hapo Alim. And there's an interesting, I think, parallel here in terms of what we pointed out about the background of this key Deutsche Bank unit. I believe the woman's name is Rosemary Vrablik. That's right, Vrablik, who ends up fronting this key Deutsche Bank unit that included people like Justice Kennedy, Supreme Court Justice Kennedy, Anthony Kennedy's son Justin, in relationship to major Trump loans when no other American-based bank would loan to Trump anymore. And Vrablik apparently gets her background in coming into banking on a train ride from upstate New York in conversation with, I believe, a Hapu Alim bank executive. Now I'll double check that. I think it's Hapo Alim, unless it's one of the other major Israeli banks. But there's some interesting network network analysis I think that could be done right now in terms of which banks have been targeted. I can't yet suss out all of the deep politics behind that or who the different potential players are. And then just finally finishing up, obviously, on the surface of the question of Silicon Valley Bank going down, that the overt data is that the executives at Silicon Valley Bank were having to readjust their assets holding in terms of what Bloomberg News actually had reported just a few weeks earlier, that there were over a half a trillion dollars of unrealized losses in terms of U.S. banking system wide that seem to be directly related to the escalation of um, of interest rates in terms of U.S. securities and long term treasuries, right? So where they've been amped up to maybe 2.5 to 3x where they were just a few years ago when Silicon Valley Bank was getting tons of inflow of capital and was parking some of it in what was seen as secure areas like long-term U.S. Treasury type securities, and now that then in relationship to the current interest rates becomes a massive potential loss, and they're trying to realign their asset holdings to be more secure over the long term, and that begins to be announced. And then there is a a bank run that is instigated. Now, it's part of the bank run is definitely understandable in terms of certain, especially small tech companies that are worried that they're not going to have access to funds to meet payroll. But the question of Peter Thiel as a key early player in like really lighting the fire towards the bank run, I think has to be looked at in the midst of some of this more surface level information.
Out, Jeremy. And I wanted to circle back to what you were saying about Netanyahu, because I was just thinking about this as you were talking. You mentioned the almost like Trump on steroids in terms of like judicial system and all this, which is like, I believe, obviously one of the major catalysts of these protests in Israel that I even identified Ehud Barak and Tzipi Livni on Fareed Zakaria's CNN show as voices of I guess you could call it the resistance against Netanyahu, fighting for Israel's democracy. I mean, make of that what you will. I mean, obviously there's some problems there, but I did notice that the other day, and it's interesting. Like, it's just a serious escalation, which I guess at the moment is still not getting that much attention within U.S. media. But it made me think, Jeremy, you talking about that, you mentioning that the way you did, made me think that trying to make sense of this Netanyahu, who is not ideologically, I don't think, aligned with these, would be the equivalent of these our own culture war hardliners, but that it's expedient. And I'm thinking about the political potential expedience of this as it relates to a potentially the potential of an imminent indictment of Donald Trump. And far be it for me to put like too much faith or stock into the quote unquote justice system, but as people have pointed out, it would be over what the payments to Stormy Daniels. Stormy Horseface Daniels. I never had an affair with her, even though I got my first wife mixed up with E. Jean Carroll, who's too ugly for me. But
Yeah,
as
she
people,
talks about my little mushroom, but I had to just look at her horse face, and she reminds me of E. Jean Carroll. I would never even touch her
right, right. But as people have
with a
pointed out,
10-foot pole or my little micro mushroom.
indeed, yeah. Just get her confused with your first wife. I mean, whatever. But as people have pointed out, even someone as infamous as Al Capone, like his ultimate being taken down wasn't over murders or anything like that. It was tax evasion, ultimately, I believe, that brought Al Capone down. And obviously, like if Trump were to be brought down, quote unquote, by something like, Stormy Daniels scandal or something like that, I mean, there would be obviously a very concerted effort that we would have to position ourselves, I think, is continuing to be at the forefront of, along with some other astute observers out there, that there would be a very limited scope in terms of like, this would be the thing to bring down like the Trump operation. Ultimately, if it was, I'm not saying it's going to be, but there would be some serious problems with that. But just the question of potentially the lingering potential actual indictment taking place in New York State. And thinking about that, is Netanyahu using this hardline takeover of, it looks like, of elements of Israeli society government, different level or another, to solidify his own standing in terms of potentially further legal problems for him going forward, which have been obviously a major issue for him to deal with for a number of years. So I'm thinking about that, and that's a pretty interesting question. And so I wonder about that going forward. Is that something we're going to see play out? Is there this continued expediency? And then also I'm wondering, like, it's still not like, this has been flying under the radar for years, as we've been talking about, like this impending, I think, collision course. So like the U.S. is on with the Netanyahu forces in Israel, and it's flown much more under the radar compared, obviously, to Russia, as we've talked about so much on the show over the past number of years, and the Israeli angle and the influence of Israel and lobbying interests over our Congress, over our political system, and the lessening of scope in terms of where like 11/9 foreign collusion investigations need to go. But there has been this this has been this collision course. I think it's been going on for a number of years. We obviously saw it play out under Obama, it's played out under Trump, but it's still playing out now. And I wonder, is it still, the usual suspects? The authorities are saying all the right things about the special relationship. I think Lloyd Austin the defense secretary was just in Israel, and he expressed concern about some of the changes going on. I think some of the settlement policy, but then also reassured Israel that the U.S. is going to be its um, unquestioning ally in terms of countering the Iranian nuclear program and all this. So the this continued escalation, much like I think what we're seeing going on with our own culture wars here, and maybe, as you said, Jeremy, maybe even more intense in this moment in Israel. That combined with even things like I think one of the fruits, so to speak, of 11/9, which is the Saudi Arabia stepping in for a deal between China stepping in between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And so I continue to wonder when if this collision course ever reaches like this day of reckoning between the U.S. I think the U.S. bipartisan foreign policy establishment is on with the events going on in Israel. I continue to wonder when it's going to happen. So I guess I'm laying out a combination of two things here: is Netanyahu solidifying his alliance with these hardliners as a sort of CYA, save his ass type of scenario, and what that would mean in terms of the continuing alliance, it seems, between like these hardliners on a global basis, and in terms of our own Congress and the takeover, I think, that's taken place. And then the question of like these escalations geopolitically in terms of China stepping in this big way, and then Netanyahu's reluctance, to say the least, in terms of Russia Ukraine to get involved in any significant manner, and we have our own stance on where we think he falls in that. And then this I wonder, like, I've been asking this for years, and I still continue to wonder, like are we set for another potential escalation, like in terms of I think this long term, I think, collision course. It appears that the American foreign policy establishment and the forces around Netanyahu seem to be headed to for probably, I mean, this is a decades long dynamic, but I think it's really escalated in the past, probably since Netanyahu and Obama openly clashed and on from there. But I just keep thinking, like, is the head coming? I don't know when this thing's going to reach a head, but it seems like potentially it could happen sooner than later. And there's unforeseen events that are going to go on with this 2024 campaign geopolitically that we still don't know about yet. So I'm once again got that like in my something I'm thinking a lot about.
Yes, and I want to um, a- address this question of the geopolitics that you just brought up in terms of the Chinese brokering of a new détente between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and then also the relationship to American domestic politics in terms of 2024. But I just first want to correct what I said before about Rosemary of Vrablic, and that I was incorrect in terms of it being it was the wrong, but it was Bank Leumi, that her entrance into private banking was in 1989 after a quote unquote chance 2 hour train conversation with Howard Ross, the then chief credit officer of Bank Leumi. And then it says that when she joined Deutsche Bank in 2006, she was widely recognized as one of the top private bankers to the U.S. ultra high net worth community. And then interestingly, and that included obviously this idea of her being the quote unquote private banker to Donald Trump, including having been involved in the Trump International Hotel and Tower in Chicago investment, which I believe was also the one that was also with Soros, I think. But it's interesting. She then announced her retirement from Deutsche Bank on December 22nd, 2020. And so that's an interesting timing in terms of the lead up, right, between the 11/3 date of 2020 to the January 6th of 2021 thing. And I imagine it's partially because of the amount of exposure and the escalating investigations into Deutsche Bank, especially in relationship to Trump. But remember, Deutsche Bank was also the locus of such scandals as the Jeffrey Epstein money, laundering, money holding aspects, questions of the Roman Abramovich, the maybe key then UK based Russian oligarchs that some people would call Putin's purse, that then also then was the key seed funder of the escalation of ethnic cleansing lawfare operations in Jerusalem, uh, under the guise of archaeological tourism, and that kind of thing. But also then the Russian laundromat of dozens of billions of dollars being washed from Russian organized crime, and then of course Deutsche Bank with its deep background in financing Auschwitz. Right. Okay. So there's that. Do want to get back to what I think this is a crucial question right now, actually, in terms of as we then approach this anniversary of the U.S. launching of the Iraq War, in terms of the 20 years later, the what has actually happened geopolitically, in terms of the region and the regional players, in terms of all of that. And I would point out that this role of China to sort of step in to now broker a new deal, a new détente economically, it looks like, and somewhat politically between Iran and Saudi Arabia, to me looks like a perfectly orchestrated result of the 11/9 operation from the American side, right? Because in many ways, the United States, especially in terms of where our foreign policy was headed and international relations regime was headed in the second Obama term, it was heading towards the United States playing that role, right? Iran was going to be taken off the table in terms of this endless every 6 month threatening by the Netanyahu and Likud types on American television and all of their agents and assets in place in the American media of the Iranian nuclear threat. At the very least, the JCPOA was going to take it off the table for many, many years, at the very least, at while then bringing Iran into the Western fold to some extent in terms of economics, right? And especially when you go back and look at the way that it's been weaponized about the return of Iranian funds by Obama, the Obama administration, as the sort of the filling the coffers of the terrorist mullahs, and that kind of scenario. But now what you see is this vacuum that was then created via Trump. As we pointed out over and over again, Trump announced that his first and foremost issue for entering into the presidential fray was this really bad Iran deal. It's a horrible deal. And that's just straight Netanyahu talking points, right? And so he enters in like that and then blows that whole thing up, and then they create this coalition of the Israelis and their Arab neighbors against Iran, right?
Yeah. And Jeremy, I'll add that in this time, like you had this maybe good cop, bad cop type of scenario going on where Russia was the supporter. Russia, along with China, internationally supported the JCPOA and all this. But I think you can even look at that, especially when you look at the combined collusion on an international scale, especially with Russia and these other countries in the Middle East. That was even more like, seems to me, more motivated by just geopolitically just discrediting the Americans, I think, and they're taking the power out of their hands. And so I think you could look at that like almost as like a bit of a hand in glove kind of 1-2 punch, where like the Russians are supporting the deal, but like it's done like, I think, in this very cynical discrediting of the Americans and taking the power out of their hands, even though like on one hand it's still, I think it discredits like the American hawks, but then on the other hand, you've got this, even though the U.S. is like brokering this and Russia supporting it, like still at the same time they're actively working to weaken and undermine everything that the sitting president that was at the center of putting this together was doing. So I think there's a good cop, bad cop horseshoe type thing going on there with Russia in the Iran deal. Well, while Israel and Trump are obviously frothing at the mouth against it, Netanyahu and Trump in particular.
And I would also then say that if the course of where American international relations and foreign policy was headed under the second term of Obama had not been basically aborted, then we would have likely been in a situation that would have, I believe, would have had a lot less tension in terms of war dynamics, in terms of the U.S. versus China, where the United States would have been involved in geopolitically and in an economic fashion, bringing some kind of restability to the region after the horror of the Iraq War on all of its levels. That included then, obviously, with the escalation of the both facing off against Iran and meanwhile vacuums for Iranian moves in Iraq and the region more generally, right? Which then serves the Netanyahu types in terms of facing off against Iran on their border in Syria, and all of that. But that if the U.S. had been allowed to continue down that more, I think, stable path and more rational, actual American, interest path, I would say, in terms of the terms of realpolitik, then you would have had a situation where China would still be deeply involved. They'd be deeply involved with their economic interests and their Belt Road Initiative, and there would have been a an actual situation where we would be set up globally for a much better situation in terms of what is there is of course going to be inevitable great power competition. Once you have multiple power, like major powers in the world, you're going to have competition. That's going to happen. But that competition should be most securely and stably handled in relationship to actual political and economic competition rather than a face-off around that could set to both sides to escalate towards militarism and war. So I think we're now facing that question of whether the hawk, the sort of, and some of them are pseudo hawks. This is again these weaponized dialectics that we pointed out, even going back to the Cold War in terms of some of the uber hawks on quote both sides of the Cold War seem to be facilitating each other's interests, and they seem to also then be some of the crews then also tied in to the deep Israeli state and the long-term domination of the Likud types, with then the pinnacle being Netanyahu's election. Again, reminder, Arthur Finkelstein. That for example, Kennedy and Khrushchev, there is data that would suggest that there was some kind of a militaristic detente that they were beginning to both move toward because they realized that it would serve both of their people and population to not escalate endless military spending and escalate the threat of nuclear war, but focus on an actual competition of ideas and systems and economics and industrial capacity, and all of that. And so we see a similar kind of unfolding of where you see these hawks, I think, uber hawks or pseudo hawks on both sides, uh, in terms of continuing Russia and the United States, but also now additionally China and the United States, where they're serving the interests, these certain power sets on quote unquote both sides of the escalation of the collision course. So this is why then domestic politics in the United States and in this continuing wake of the 11/9 operation and the destruction of the under the guise of the sort of Trump MAGA quote unquote populist pseudo, I would say, rise that we're facing. that this is as important as ever. And so one last, weaponized dialectic I think that we see coming up is related to what I said before, DeSantis versus Trump, especially when we acknowledge that there are growing uh, data points suggesting that Trump is under some kind of legal danger, although does begin to look like potentially milk toast and potentially very little legal teeth, especially in terms of potential jail time if it really only gets hung up on something like Stormy Daniels' payoffs in relationship to campaign finance violations or something like that. Now, even that alone, as you pointed out, Greg, in terms of the history of the mob being held to tax issues, that could potentially have the threat to neuter Trump politically. But I would say that if you have Trump under indictment while he's running for president, he can still run for president. He will operate on that as basically just proof of concept that he actually is a threat to the deep state. They hate me. If they can do this to me, they can do this to you. If they can get you weaponize my own mushroom
Hmm.
sensibilities against
Yeah.
horse face. They can do that to you and all of that. So I can imagine a situation where you could have a Trump candidate under indictment, still running, using it for social credibility amongst his base, facing off against a DeSantis. And it doesn't, at some level, all of that serves this ongoing domestic weaponization, and I'm concerned that that's actually where we're headed.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in addition to Trump not only draining the swamp and saving America, he's going to save the world from World War III. That's the way he's positioning himself now. Like he's the only person who can stop World War III through the nuclear escalation and all that nonsense. So, I mean, it is. And and going back to that, it's interesting you mentioned what might be Ron DeSantis. Maybe some type of Mayflower Hotel moment with his leaked statement to Tucker Carlson that Ukraine is a territorial conflict and it's not within the U.S. national interest. And DeSantis naming off all the things that like the anti-woke MAGA hawks would love to hear, like we need to worry more about our own southern border, and we need to worry more about China and all this, and worry more about getting the proponents of genderqueer studies out of our schools to stop preying on and grooming our children. And so it's very interesting that that happens. And if Trump were to be seriously, it's interesting. Like, is this almost like that? Maybe I don't know. We'll have to hear more from DeSantis, like as far as his actual policy goes going forward, and regarding this. But it's interesting that maybe the biggest potential threat to Donald Trump in a GOP primary in a time when maybe the rhetoric once again is increasing of the potential of an indictment coming, that DeSantis like comes out and positions himself, at least in this statement, as it's a territorial conflict that is not, we don't have any vital interest at stake here. I mean, I don't know, but I find it interesting that that statement would be made potentially in a moment like this. But I mean, all of this is going to be super fascinating. It'll be interesting to see how the paleo neocons, as we call them, respond to DeSantis taking this tone, at least in this published statement on Ukraine, because it could answer some questions regarding like the nature of the opposition and how much it might be rooted in this hawkishness to Russia. And there are people who do want to move away from Trump. I think that's pretty clear with like Fox. Like Trump has not been featured on Fox since September in any type of interview format. And I mean, whereas DeSantis is getting nonstop interviews with Fox and PR through the form of Brian Kilmeade of Fox and Friends playing catch with Ron DeSantis while they talk policy and all this. I mean, it's pretty nonstop PR blitz for DeSantis on Fox, as opposed to Trump, who has not been on Fox since September in any type of interview format. And so obviously there's there's a hankering to move away from Trump. I think the combination, he's so toxic at this point, to hitch your wagon to this combination of things, like hitching your wagon to this after January 6th with the what appears to be increased volatility and instability on his part in terms of like just the rhetoric. And I mean, the rhetoric's always been a problem going back to his nonstop Twitter days, but like now it's just like you get the sense that there's a bit more of like an unhinged element going on with Trump at this point. He's damaged goods, and he's damaging to be further associated with that, as those Fox emails pointed out even before January 6th happened. But there's also not going to be this effort to like continue to try to protect and run cover for, and even in some cases promote Trump as like, that he was the victim and target of the deep state and nothing was done wrong, and everything's just a hoax against him. But clearly there's this hankering to move on. But as we've talked about, I think that DeSantis and Trump and this statement about Ukraine, and it's not as obvious, like he's not moving in the direction of like the actual people who are actually promoting and propagating and cheerleading, doing PR basically for Russian interests in this, or Putin-based interests. But it is a statement that distinguishes like this is territorial. We're not going to make this a major concern going forward. And that this is happening now in this moment, and there's an increased indistinguishability between Trump and DeSantis, just that DeSantis is much more effective at governing, obviously. And so he's seen as more stable, probably. And there are people who want to move away from that. I think we identified that a few months ago. But we've also seen that, like, if somehow Trump remains a politically viable source and it actually survives like a primary and is once again, like, heaven forbid, your nominee for president, then I think these same interests will once again they will once again have to rally behind him, I think. And so, but also what we're learning here, just even look at even moving beyond from DeSantis, who is like this creation of like these, I would say maybe these mobbed up Florida Zionist MAGA interests. It looks like there's some questions even about his long-term background that we would still have to explore. I know that Media Roots Radio, in coordination with Mike Preisner, did good analysis on DeSantis and his role both at Guantanamo Bay and in Iraq in the mid-2000s that people should go and check out. There's questions about his long-term background, but there's this increased indistinguishability, not just between Trump and DeSantis, but between the entire field. Like, even look at how Nikki Haley has gone from being like this centrist, making her name around banning the Confederate flag in South Carolina after the massacre at the church in Charleston in 2015, to now refusing to criticize Trump. And basically every talking point of hers is going to be about how she's going to do the same things Trump is doing, and all this wokeness is out of control and this and that. Or to the rest of the candidates. I mean, even Mike Pence, the vice president, who was the culture war evangelical placement into the Trump ticket to ensure that he could, I think, really carry that vote, because of he was seen as like the evangelical culture warrior and all this. And now, even after it appears, I think, pretty credible that that he was actually threatened on January 6th in terms of like the last recourse. Like, there were no legal ways he was going to be able to take part in this overturning the results, and he was put in an impossible situation. He was targeted for it, and even then, now, like, he's still spouting the same points about wokeness. He's positioned himself as like rhetorically the hawk on Putin. Like, there's no room for Putin apologists in the Republican Party, and we must do everything we can to help Ukraine and all that. But like, just a total still totally obviously in this operation in terms of still not talking honestly about like the nature of the Trump operation, even after his life potentially was put in danger on January 6th. And then all the ways that we know that he's totally in with like the woke culture war and all of this. And so there's it's a bad situation. And we've talked about the increasing where the maybe the Marjorie Taylor Greens now, whereas like at one point the GOP, like let's say people like Louis Gohmert was an exception. And now it seems like the people like the Marjorie Taylor Greens are going to become more of the norm going forward. People with her type of like open rhetorical politics and all of this, and the policies being pushed. And you're talking to me, Jeremy, about this Kansas event with Rick Santorum and this Mark Meckler basically almost going back to the Constitutional Convention talk of splitting away on a state level from the federal government and all this, very weaponized, and obviously the national divorce rhetoric of Marjorie Taylor Greene. The field like is now indistinguishable from, and it's much more obvious and open in a way of like as bad as like the even the Republican Party was in the Bush days, or even going back to the '90s and 2000s, and even the first time around Trump ran. This is a different party, and like it was already a destructive force, but now like it is just on a different level in terms of destructiveness. I think you just have to look at the rhetoric and the policies that are being pushed by these people, all the way from a Ron DeSantis to a Mike Pence to a once moderate anti-Confederate flag crusader and Nikki Haley. It's I say this a lot, but it's ominous would be an understatement. This is not to say this is not a good trajectory would be an understatement. And once again, it just shows the consequences that are coming with not even the slightest bit of accountability for major players involved in not only stealing an election and installing a foreign agent, but then aiding and abetting and even planning to some level or another a coup attempt after losing the election that followed his installment.
Well, thank you for all of that, Greg, and thank you for bringing up this Kansas event coming up, because that was the last thing that's really in immediately on my radar, that really, in many ways, I think connects some of the local politics that I've been paying attention to and somewhat involved with just here in the city of Lawrence, but then immediately links it to the state government in Kansas, which is just down the road to the west, about half hour, 40 minutes in Topeka. And then the nature of all of that politics that then has major national, and I would say then uh, international implications, that you have this Mark Meckler group coming in to, they have, I got it, I'm on some of these email lists. I subscribe to some substacks of folks who are in the local area who are tied into this scene, and just got an announcement of this event that is coming up, just actually March 21st, spring, the first day of spring. And it's the Convention of States Action Kansas Spring Clean the Feds rally. It's time for some spring cleaning. Let's clean the swamp on the south steps of the Topeka Capitol. Speakers include U.S. Senator Rick Santorum and Mark Meckler. And this is crucial, and especially in my realm here, where we do our macro analytical work in terms of the antidote, and then I also have been involved to lesser or greater extent at different times in the last decade in local politics in Lawrence. And this is very interesting because one of the key bloggers in the area who's covered what I see as a sort of a magasphere provocateur in many ways, who ended up running for county government as a Republican, and who made his infamous name during the pandemic as the sort of most frontal and aggressive anti, quote unquote, anti-masker in the area, who then also seemed to have played the key role of provoking potential shutdown of the public fora at the county commission and the city commission. Now that was heading that way at the city commission until we pushed it back. They were going to start editing out public comment on their YouTube channel at the city commission, just like the county commission had done and continues to do to this day. I believe it's very likely it's a First Amendment violation, potentially, that once they open up a forum, even if it's a designated public forum, and then host it as the full record on YouTube, even though YouTube is a corporate, a corporate um, platform that doesn't have the same First Amendment restrictions. But I think it's very similar to even things that Trump was held accountable, where it was you were not allowed to remove followers or block followers once you had created as a public official, a designated public forum on Twitter, for example, or on Facebook. But these characters who are then tied into this con kind of movement, which is operating at a very intense pace and a national scale. They have made a lot of headway in terms of these state governments, in terms of calling the question of a constitutional convention that is very nebulous and dubious, I would say, in terms of the scope of it. They just want to uh, dial back the federal government. They loosely talk about specific limitations on spending or on term limits, but there's a lot more behind that. And so when I see these connections of these characters who are operating at the local level, who basically act as provocateurs to the local government and allow the local government to then try to suppress speech, core political speech. And there's just a small group of us who are able to at least hold back some of the suppression at the city level that still is now operating at the county level, which is, by the way, where this local character, Justin Spees is his name, ended up running for that county commission and then losing as a Republican. This is still all in Republican politics, that this is now then all tied into them bringing in Santorum and Mark Meckler. Remember, Santorum is a crucial neoconservative id voice from way back. There was a moment, remember, during the George W. Bush administration, wherein there was the escalation of threats from such crucial people as Dick Cheney, Michael Chertoff, and then the triplicate, the troika of dirty bomb threateners. I called them terrorists at the time because they were basically making terrorist threats, promising that there was a dirty bomb coming at this key moment in 2007, I think it was. And this is where Santorum comes from, right? And you point out, Greg, that he's like one of the perfect archetypes of a hardcore culture warrior and a terror warrior, right? And so now he's being brought in with Mark Meckler, who has a background in helping start the Tea Party, quote unquote, patriots, and all of this is being financed from way back by the same real American oligarch types and who've shown themselves to be, I would say, more and more seditious, even of intent over time, such as the Kochs and the Mercers. That's who's right behind all of this. This is not local grassroots patriots who are interested in constitutional limitations on government or self governance, as Mark Meckler uh, now talks about after he left the Tea Party. No, this is the Mercer operation. This is the Koch operation. And so this is now beginning to like really sort of come to my doorstep here. And I'm beginning to see the specific ties locally in terms of the way that the local dynamics of weaponized MAGA politics under the guise of libertarianism and new patriotism. Now, remember, Mark Meckler, I think, even wrote a book about this second American Revolution, right? And now Tim Pool's newest regular co-host, Labonte, I think his name is, always identifies himself as a anti-communist and counter-revolutionary. Now, meanwhile, Tim Pool hosted both Meckler and then Santorum, I believe, in that order, just last year. And so Meckler's calling for a second American Revolution, all backed by some of the worst American oligarchs we have, Mercers, at the epicenter of funding the 11/9 operation, in terms of the whole, Bannon set and Cambridge Analytica and Breitbart, the whole network that's then brought together politically by the CNP, now in league with Rick Santorum, who I believe Meckler was even on the public record not that long ago about talking about how Santorum is like just a fish who flops around and just follows the latest vibes. So the fact that we have a Santorum who is put forth as some kind of steady establishment, neoconservative culture warrior type, with now what's seen as the second American revolutionaries and the next Tea Party, and that all ties into what's actually going down in terms of local government and players that I am, aware of, who I've been in the same room as, making, I believe, sensible, truly American commentary about our local government, and then having these kinds of networks come in and start talking about effing lib. S for brains and all, and then highlighting the New York Times article by Stephen, what's his name, Greg? The neocon
Oh, Brett Stevens.
Brett Stevens as sort of giving the final word on mask science in terms of the uh, COVID pandemic, while then using basically weaponizing language against entire sort of ideology of people or something like that. And so I'm seeing the storm clouds are gathering and I'm seeing more and more how these layers of the attack on the public. Remember, that's what the main thing that the Kochs and the Mercers, in terms of their institutional attack, that aligns with why they would back someone like O'Bannon, where they then weaponize the question of the deep state, but what they're really after is the quote unquote administrative state. But what they're really after is the public. They're after the public, the question of public governance, the question of public interests, the question of public assets, the question of who owns the quote unquote natural commons, right? So you have the Koch, the dirty fuel mongers, and then the Mercers, the dirty weaponized currency mongers. In combination here, bringing Rick Santorum, the terror warrior, culture warrior, fish flopper, with Mark Meckler. Remember, Mark Meckler also then ends up, he's involved with Parler. Remember the whole shady background of where Parler even begins, let alone then how it's then financed by the Mercers and the servers and all of that. Meckler ends up being an interim CEO at Parler and is still involved there. Okay. This is not grassroots. This is not American patriotism. This is MAGA warfare that I believe is actually serving foreign interests that seek to help destroy the American governance and the American public's minds, I think.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Jeremy. And I've got a couple minutes here, and I need to wrap up shortly. But I do want to make a final statement on this topic here. Follow up on what you said, and a couple of things of mine. First of all, like Rick Santorum, the way you described me kind of strikes me as like a less wonkish, less intellectual version of Newt Gingrich, and the way Newt Gingrich is portrayed as like the establishment intellectual who always aids and abets these agendas, while portraying himself as being like the the establishments guy and all that. And so I think that's Santorum strikes me as kind of being like that. And also, you mentioned the Kochs and the Mercers, kind of this coming together here. And it's very interesting. Like, you can see where the Trump DeSantis paradigm is kind of being, the Kochs are playing a key role of that through Trump having the MAGA base and all that. And DeSantis has the Club of Growth, which I believe is a heavily Koch brothers influenced, financed organization that is shaping up to be maybe his primary supporter in a Republican presidential primary going forward. And so that's very interesting. And that's also like the merging of the long-term domestic kind of maybe economic vulture interests, or what forget the term that Greg Palast used in his book. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes. I think of
the
vulture.
vultures, the economic vultures on a domestic scale that were very much aligned with the Paul Ryans and the weak rhinos, but now merged in with this escalatory, just really domestic destabilization on a policy and as much as possible. And now those have been with the increased foreign elements, I think, more intertwined. So you're seeing that paradigm of like Koch and Mercer, and even the Koch paradigm with Trump and DeSantis at play. So I think that's very interesting to follow. I just wanted to talk a little more about this whole thing with the what's going on, what appears to be going on in Kansas. I need to look more at it myself, but I think on a macro, bigger picture scale, I think I have a pretty good understanding. But this is the fruits of the weaponized, potentially internationally uh, inclined, oriented Tea Party with the still undisclosed questioning of a member. It was taken as gospel that, oh, Lois Lerner and uh, the corrupt IRS are targeting the patriots for daring to stand up against big government tyranny and all this. And meanwhile, like, what exactly was the IRS and elements within the Obama administration looking into? We're looking into the funding of the Tea Party that perhaps could come from hostile domestic and foreign operatives and causes. I don't know, but that's a good question. Remember the rise of the Tea Party? You had within a year of the creation of the weaponized mass scale Tea Party protests, you had the Citizens United voting and a lot vote and a lot of things ruling and a lot of things that were going on. So like I still go back to even like the, oh, was it as simple as the persecuted Tea Party patriots being targeted by the oppressive IRS? I don't know. I mean, I tend to further and further question that narrative going forward. But I think these are the fruits of like at a state level. And at one point, I was going to start getting involved in local politics through the Ron Paul campaign. I've talked about being picked as a member of the Republican committee in Jackson County, Kansas City area, and I attended the Republican convention in 2012, Missouri State Convention, as an alternate delegate. And I remember, alternate Ron Paul delegate, and I remember the animosity between the Paul people and the Santorum and Mitt Romney people at this convention during the GOP primary, when the Romney and Santorum people basically teamed together to ensure that, partially to ensure like Ron Paul didn't get a majority of delegates at the state convention, if I recall correctly. And I just remember the animosity. And now you've got Rick Santorum acting as a public representative of one of the primary causes of like the Ron Paul libertarian culture and philosophy, which is the idea of the states separating themselves from the federal government. Of course, Alex Jones would always go back and forth between criticizing the idea of a con as like the as a Trojan horse or whatnot, but then also promoting, like, this primary staple of his was promoting the idea of the local sheriff as the preeminent authority, and um, local and state takes precedence over the federal. And so it's very interesting, this coming together here. And I just think about that image of the disdain and the animosity of the Paul people for like the way that these Romney and Santorum, and particularly Santorum here now, Santorum has openly aligned himself with this. With the movement of basically, as Marjorie Taylor Greene would say, the divorcing in this much more weaponized way. And I do think there probably could be room for like a serious conversation about like the federal versus state and local and all that, but it's not going to be done in this way. This is entirely being done in a destabilizing manner. And now the Ron Paul interest and the Alex Jones interest and the long-term John Birch Society anti-communist will be the equivalent of the Cold War culture warriors before that term was popularized, have now come together with these like establishment friendly Rick Santorum types. And I mean, I use the term ominous again, but like this is a troublesome time in this time of increased domestic instability, manufactured and by design, that now you've got Rick Santorum openly aligning himself with these long-term, or seen as like these libertarian Ron Paul revolution types of narratives of the battle between local and federal government on such a toxic, escalated scale.
It's a great point. And I do have more that I want to say in terms of the weaponization of Building 7, but we'll deal with that next time, because there's a lot to unpack there. So I'll just mention that, set that aside for now. And then my final piece for our current topic would be, I really think you're onto something in terms of this question of the current, almost the fusion of the what Santorum represents with what then the Ron Paul movement represented. It's obviously being fused in some very highly toxic fashion, and the Tim Pool show is a perfect example of this. Still to this day, Ron Paul is a little bit of like a saint of the, at least of their libertarian id there. While then Tim Pool hosts the Mark Mecklers and the Santorums, very friendly, and then does Fedcasts from inside the bowels of the deep state and the swamp in the offices of someone like Matt Gaetz with Bannon at the table, and all of that. So I think that that's a perfect way to consider the nature of this very toxic fusion in terms of a pseudo right, I would say, a pseudo conservative movement, as somehow the remaining the remnants, the ideological remnants of the Ron Paul movement and some of the movement building around that combined now with this real who no this is Santorum is MAGA now. What the heck is going on here? But that Santorum fusion with the Tea Party and the Ron Paul love evolution revolution. Remember that was also a revolution, Labonte, and this is now being fused together at the table that you sit at every single night. Get a clue, get a life.
Right.
Politically, we are in deep times. People need to get get some awareness here.
Absolutely. I think Santorum, like so many others, was probably reluctant MAGA, but ultimately became full-throated public supporter of it reluctantly. But even now, with like the shift and the change, like in the escalation and the takeover of the party, like Santorum could position himself as like this with this cause, and then also even support someone other than Trump. So it's the fruits ultimately of like the aftermath of MAGA, where it's like they're so closely intertwined together in terms of policy that they're almost indistinguishable. When that wasn't the case before, when there was this actual takeover of the GOP and the flipping and the strong arming of many of these Council for National Policy establishment GOP type figures from going from never Trump to Trump. So it's and we'll follow up, I think, Jeremy, in the next few days with this conversation about what you want to get into with the Building 7 question and Tucker Carlson and all that surrounds that, combined with maybe some reflections on 20 years anniversary of the launching of the Iraq War here coming forward here in the next few days. But I think definitely we will have a conversation about these things, and we'll definitely have this Building 7 talk, and probably some talk about Iraq as well. I don't know. We'll see what we want to do with that in the next couple of weeks, because it's obviously still so vitally important as we continue to move on and things continue to escalate, and still the lack of understanding of like basic things such as like not all neocons are carbon copies of each other, monolithic entities and everything. So we'll get more into that here within the next few days, I think. But now,
And by the way, Greg, I just have one last image of a fusion of troikas that popped in my mind that I want to share before we end the episode. Is where you go back to 2006, 2007, with the ongoing wake of the Iraq War and the terror regime post 9/11. And I think what we're seeing right now is even, and now some people are not going to like this, but I think we're seeing the fusion of the deep state id of characters who were making dirty bomb terrorist threats openly and publicly on public platforms such as Dick Cheney, Michael Chertoff, and Rick Santorum. Now, that troika of dirty bomb terrorist threat makers fused with what's become of the troika of the so-called anti-war squad, which I would say you got to say Ron Paul, Dennis Kucinich, and Cynthia McKinney. That's what we're faced there. Maybe the id of Santorum, Chertoff, and Cheney fused with the ego, the modern ego of Ron Paul, Dennis Kucinich, and Cynthia McKinney. By the way, Kucinich and Ron Paul at the Rage Against the War Machine rally too.
there you go. And while you mentioned those three, the one who actually in Congress voted against the authorization to use military force in Afghanistan post September 11th is Barbara Lee, who's running for Senate in California, and that will be very interesting.
That's the best Senate candidate I've seen from California, Barbara Lee. She has standing.
Well, definitely
at the very
better
least.
than Adam Schiff, and it will be interesting to see her and Katie Porter square off in
BB
those primaries.
BB buddy, Katie
Yeah,
Porter.
it'll be very interesting. It will be interesting to say the least. But anyway, on that note, we'll be back soon. Thank you, Jeremy.
All right, thank you, Greg. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate you. Until next time, AnteDote, we are out.